Good evening, everyone. My name's Brock McMillan. I'm the chair of the Central Region RAC. Call this meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. on May 14th, 2024. Welcome everybody to the Central Region Advisory Council meeting. This meeting is being held in person at the Central Region office in Springville, as well as being streamed live on YouTube. This public forum allows you to express your opinions and ideas on wildlife management in our state. This RAC considers your feedback on the proposals before us today and reports them to the Wildlife Board. The Wildlife Board, not the RAC, is charged with setting wildlife policy for our state. Wildlife management is complex and sometimes it's emotionally charged. We all have ideas and opinions about what is best for Utah's wildlife. That's why we're all here today, and that's a good thing. We encourage those who want to express their opinion in today's meeting to fill out a comment card like this. We expect those in attendance to respect the people who speak, especially those who hold views that don't align with your own. Respectful behavior facilitates efficient meetings where the RAC members can listen, digest, and address the concerns, ideas, and proposals being presented for consideration. Disrespectful behavior, including booing, yelling, cheering, or laughing while someone is speaking, will not be tolerated. You can help maintain a respectful space by referring to people by name instead of descriptors. If any of this behavior occurs, I'll remind attendees to be respectful, and if it continues, we'll ask somebody to leave. Lastly, to help reduce distractions during the meeting, please put your phone on silent, and if you need to make a call, please step outside the room. Again, if you want to make a comment tonight, you need to fill out one of these yellow cards. They're on the table right outside the door, and would love to hear your comments. At this time, I'll turn the time over to the RAC members to introduce themselves.
Mike Christensen at large.
Bryce Castanetto at large.
And we have 3 members attending online. Let's start with Jim, then Josh, then Brooke.
Jim Schuler, non-consumptive.
Josh Leonard, Sportsman's Route.
Brooke Shakespeare, Forest Service.
Excellent, which gives us 7, which is a quorum. I'd also like to welcome Darren. He's online. And DeBloois, and he gave the Cougar update, and we'll talk to him. Chad Wilson, the Private Lands Public Wildlife Coordinator. Kobe Jones is here in person, Wildlife Section Chief, and Mark Farmer, the Regional Habitat Manager. Would like to welcome all the public who are attending in person and those who are watching on YouTube. Again, those who are attending in person have the opportunity to make a comment on the agenda. Oh, excellent. I would also like to welcome Gary Nielsen, who's attending in person from the Wildlife Board, Paula Richmond, who is attending electronically from the Wildlife Board, and I believe, right there, bottom left, Randy Dirth, who's attending electronically from the Wildlife Board. Man, 3/5 of the Wildlife Board is in attendance. That's impressive. At this time, make sure I'm on. I'd welcome a motion to accept the agenda as written. Bryce makes a motion, and Mike seconds. All those in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. And also a motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor?
Aye.
That passes unanimously as well. And now it's my turn to give you an update from what happened at the last board meeting. At the last board meeting, on the buck deer permit recommendations, there was a motion made to approve the buck deer permit number recommendations as presented. The motion was amended by Bryce Thurgood. He asked to amend the motion to meet the middle of the wildlife permit recommendations with an increase in the Southern Region permit That amendment passed for lack of a second. The original motion to approve as recommended passed with a vote of 3-2. The once-in-a-lifetime permit recommendations, there was a motion to approve the once-in-a-lifetime permit recommendations as presented, including increasing moose permits from 22 to 25. There was a motion to amend that and ask to increase the bison permit numbers on unit 6535 from 3 to 5 permits. That motion was accepted by the motion maker, and Bryce Thurgood, and seconded by Gary Nielsen. There was a second amendment by Brett Sulman to ask to reduce the Mineral Mountain Ram permits by 1. That motion died for lack of a second, and therefore the once-in-a-lifetime permits were passed as presented with the increase in moose permits and the increase in bison permits unanimously. Bull elk permit recommendations, there was a motion to approve the bull elk permit recommendations as presented. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve the buck pronghorn permit recommendations as presented. That passed unanimously. There was a motion to approve the antlerless permit recommendations as presented and to add language in the guidebook about not taking a cow with a calf. That motion passed unanimously. There was a motion on the shed antler gathering and big game rule amendments. There was a motion that we keep the requirement to plug sheep until the new system is in place. And that motion failed 3-2. There was a motion to ban the possession of thermal imaging for the take of big game year round. That motion died for lack of a second. There was a motion to ask the Shed Antler Gathering Committee to reconvene and recommend Shed Antler Gathering season dates for residents that matches non-resident dates. And that motion passed unanimously. There was a motion to accept the division proposal as presented, and that passed with, that failed, 2 in favor, 3 opposed. There was a motion to accept the remainder of the proposal as presented, excluding the season closure for non-residents on Shed Antler Gathering, and that passed unanimously. Then on the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations, there was a motion to accept the division's recommendations as presented, and that passed 4 in favor and 1 recusal. And that's a summary. Any questions about the board meeting? Okay, I'll turn the time over to Jason for a regional update.
All right, thanks, Brock. I appreciate it. Do you have the presentation up, Mike? All right, with spring here and summer right around the corner, it's been super busy for all of our sections. They're able to get out and about and start working their way up the mountain. In our wildlife section, a couple of exciting things going on. This last Sunday, the first elk cow that we captured in the winter gave birth. So this is really the official beginning of the deer and fawn and elk calf captures on the Nebo unit. That's a neonate study, and that's in conjunction with BYU and Brock and Randy and their group out there. So we're really excited about that. That'll really start picking up here over the next probably month and a half or almost 2 months perhaps. So also a lot of our staff, not only in the region but statewide, are attending the North American Moose Conference. Division of Wildlife took a heavy lift on that and got that conference up and running, and we have attendance from all over the nation as well as Canada coming to that meeting. So we're excited about that. And then Brinley Jones, if you've been in our RAC meeting, she typically sits over here taking our notes for us. She was promoted to our depredation technician, and she's actually the one that's going to be doing a lot of work on the neonate study for a master's project at BYU. And tonight in her place, we have Bailey Wheeler taking notes for us. So welcome, Bailey. Glad to have you here. Aquatic section, tons of stuff going on there as well. A lot of monitoring going on. Several years ago, we worked on Maple Lake in Payson Canyon. They had a lot of goldfish in there, so we attempted to get all those goldfish out of there. Goldfish are really hard to kill and get rid of. So there's still some in there, quite a bit in there. We are working on getting wipers in there, and they're healthy to go after some of those goldfish as well as tiger trout. And we just encourage people to get up there as soon as they can to catch fish as well. Yuba, second round of sampling showed good densities of wipers. And again, we just encourage people to get out and take advantage of the year classes of wipers down at Yuba. We've also done some surveys at Stansbury Lake, Urns Reservoir in San Pete County, and community fisheries throughout the Wasatch Front here. If you recall, last December, there was a report on social media. Somebody caught a walleye in Strawberry Reservoir, and walleye are not supposed to be in Strawberry Reservoir. So we wanted to see if there were other walleye throughout the reservoir. So we've devised a detection program that'll take place most of this summer. It's going to involve some sampling throughout the lake with netting and some DNA testing. And so we've started that program, and it's going to be a heavy lift for Strawberry folks. So we encourage anybody up there, if they do catch a walleye, to please give us a call and let us know. Our native species program, June sucker spawning, is ongoing in the Provo River and the Hobble Creek deltas. And for many years, we had a carp removal program in Utah Lake that we were able to contract out with a private company to remove carp. Things have changed a little bit, and it's been several years since we've been able to remove carp from Utah Lake. This summer, we're going to start a new program where we'll be trapping carp in the lake. We've hired a biologist on to come and help us with that, and that will start here in about a month and probably last about 3 months to see if we can remove carp using those traps. And then we've had some other outreach programs there, Salem Fishing Day, which I'll talk about, Utah Lake 4th grade field trips, and we did do a catfish fishing seminar several weeks ago. Habitat section, again, it's busy. We're able to get past the mud roads onto dirt roads now. We've got WMAs throughout the region that we're getting into. Kind of our annual program for those WMAs includes spraying noxious weeds, fixing fences that were damaged over the wintertime, and then we do graze livestock, cattle on 13 of our WMAs early in the spring. We also have guzzlers out on the West Desert. Many of those guzzlers require some work to get them turned on, so our habitat folks have been out on the desert turning those on. A project in Parley's and Mill Creek Canyons to spray out myrtle spurge, and then also a 2,000-acre bullhog project on the east slope of the Stansbury Mountains. Outreach section, we had a women's shotgun shooting clinic several weeks ago, last week, I guess, for first-time shooters. Very good event, very well attended, and I think we'll continue to do some of those women shooting sports clinics. Today was our annual Salem Pond Fishing Day for kids, and this is for kids with disabilities to give them an opportunity to come out and catch some fish. It's been a great event that's been going on since, I don't know, probably 34 years or something like that. Lots of volunteers that come and help, lots of collaborators and cooperators that make this event happen. On the slide, it says 1,500 kids. I think we had more like 1,800 kids there this year. So in a matter of hours, we're able to get them a fish on the hook and feed them lunch and get them back to home or school. So great event, and I appreciate our outreach section and everybody in our region that comes and supports that. And finally, we've talked about this slightly before with the draw that's taking place and people learning what they drew. We're going to have quite a few new dedicated hunters throughout the region. The outreach section has shifted from paper timesheets to digital timesheets. Seems to be working out pretty well. We're still figuring out entirely, but hopefully this will simplify and quicken the process for getting your hours recorded. And that's both on our end and on your end, dedicated hunters end as well. So with that, that's all I have, unless there's any questions from the RAC members.
Any questions for Jason?
I've had a couple of people ask why the comment period was so short this year, or this round. It was like,
3 days.
yeah, it was like 55 hours. Is there a reason why it was like that?
I think just how it falls on the calendar. I don't have a good, Kobe, do you have any? I think sometimes we've got long comment periods, and then just depending on how it falls on the calendar and internal scheduling, it squishes some of those dates down.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add other than there's a lot of work on the back end to put these together. And so you have all of that going into it to get a polished product, as polished as we can get it out to the public. And sometimes it just doesn't all come together. There's no magic button, right? And so coming right off another board cycle, trying to get presentations recorded, edited, links created and everything, we ended up in a spot where we'd like to give more time, but we didn't have as much time.
So essentially you're saying Chad's overworked.
Essentially yeah, Chad definitely is overworked, but and a lot of other folks are too, and that's what it comes down to. We try to have the most open public process we can, and when you compare us to other government agencies, and not that they're not doing a good job, but Division of Wildlife is probably one of the most reactive and open agencies there is in state government.
Thanks, Kobe.
Any other questions for Jason? That brings us to our next agenda item. Darren, you want to maybe highlight your Cougar informational update?
Sure. Sorry I couldn't be there in person tonight. I'm attending the Western Black Bear workshops in Jackson. So we're learning a lot about bears, but switching gears to Cougars, we, I guess the 30,000 foot level and overview of the presentation is as many of you know, we had some pretty significant changes through legislation last year. We made quite a few changes to our rule based on those changes. And when looking at things this year, we felt like we didn't want to make a lot of additional changes yet. And so with 1 year under our belt since that legislation took place, we felt like we'd just provide some updates about how things are going in Cougar management and see how things look after another year.
That all you got for us, Darren?
Yeah, I mean, if people have specific questions, obviously I'm happy to answer.
Okay, any questions from the RAC?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Darren, thanks for being here. I know you're a busy guy. Jackson Black Bear Conference sounds like a good time.
Yeah, except you're stuck in the conference room the whole time.
You know, it's a great spot up there. I love being up there. So in looking at your presentation, and it gave a lot of information. Obviously, HB 469, which went into effect last year, we have yet to figure out what the impact's going to be fully on the cougar population. I understand that. In looking at your data, I understand that it just takes a simple license to go out and hunt or trap cougar. The 2024 reported cougar harvest through from November to May is about 465 animals, with maybe 20 for depredation taken out, so maybe 485. To me, that looks like it's pretty even with the full year for last year. November to November, yet we're only half a year into this. And I know that you have told me many times, I know we've had several discussions on Cougar, and I appreciate your expertise. But to me, it looks like a lot of your data shows, depredation incidents are down in 2023, losses are way down. The Cougar population that you've cited that estimated somewhere between 12 and 1,400. And there is a question coming here, don't worry. I understand that you've told me that most cougar are taken in the winter for tracking purposes. But with the legislation of HB 469, that now allows trapping and snares, which is now becoming a significant component to the overall harvest. So I'm afraid that in the remainder of the year, the next 6 months for the November calendar year, that we're going to see a significant, additional harvest of cougars. Of having to talk to some trappers who are just thrilled at the ability to go out and trap cougar without any limitation. And they have done so. A couple of fellows have caught 5, 6. One guy caught eight cougar. And I'm afraid that what is in place right now, I know it's the DWR is a victim of circumstance with our legislature, but with the policy that's in play, I feel that if we allow this to continue, it's essentially an extermination policy.
I don't want to
for cougar.
interrupt, but this is the question period. Do you have questions for him?
Yeah, I do. So I'm asking, what can DWR do? Because I think the trajectory is one of extermination for cougar if this continues. So what can we do? What can the DWR do? What can the Wildlife Board do? And I'll give you an example of something potentially that could be suggested to them, to suggest to the legislature. How about removing the trapping and snaring of cougars?
Yeah, so the language in the statute is fairly, it's concise, but it's fairly sweeping. So it simply states that it sets a cougar season from December, January 1 through the end of December, so year round. It states that a person may hunt or trap using a hunting license or combination license, whichever a person has. And again, it says that you could use those methods, so hunt and trap. Any changes to the overall allowance for trapping would require a legislative change. So that'd be something the legislature would have to change. And you mentioned that, John. What the division can do, we can certainly set some regulations about types of traps, timing, those sorts of things. You mentioned the November to November comparison. It is true that in the past, typically by this time of year, we're not seeing a whole lot of additional cougar harvest through the summer. We don't know how that'll shake out with trapping. So we did provide some year-to-year comparison. Again, it's only 1 year under the new legislation, but if you look at that comparison in the presentation, the harvest numbers are almost identical from May 3rd, when the legislation took effect last year, to now, compared to the year before when we didn't have the legislation in place. So that's a little bit more apples to apples as far as what may happen with those changes. The biggest take home from that is that we saw over the last year fewer lions taken with the use of hounds, and but that was made up for by spot and stalk and trapping takes. So again, it sort of evened out. Hopefully that answers your question, John. I'm happy to go into it some more if not.
So basically, Darren, you're saying that there's nothing you can do without legislative action.
Not in terms of prohibiting trapping. That's part of the legislative language.
Yeah, I understand that the legislature is their own body, and they make the rules. is it within the purview of the RAC and the Wildlife Board to suggest respectfully to the legislature that we revise the bill to perhaps remove snares and trapping? And if
That-
so, I would again respectfully suggest that we do that.
That'd be a call for the board. Yeah, that, I don't want to speak for
Sure.
the board on that.
Yeah, I understand that's a board decision,
Mhm.
not a central RAC decision.
It's kind of a conflict too, because the board's appointed by the legislature and works at the will of the legislature.
True, but this isn't an antagonistic confrontation with the legislature. I understand that. But, you know, the way that this bill was passed, a lot of the legislators who ended up voting for it, when they realized what they were voting for after the fact, are not in favor of it. It was, you guys know the circumstances that the Cougar line item was put in. It's a tough situation all the way around.
Completely agree. Do you have other questions for Darren?
I do not have further questions. And again, Darren, thank you so much for your expertise. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Other questions from the RAC? Go ahead, Mike.
Can you remind us what the average ages you're seeing? I mean, of the cougars being harvested now?
Yeah, it didn't change much. I've got it here, Mike. Let me. Average age looks like last year was 3, and it's been in the 3 to 4 range for a decade, so it didn't really change a whole lot.
Darren, what about the sex? Has the sex harvested changed?
Yeah, it has. It did come up significantly. Again, November to November, so it's 56% since last November, females in the harvest. That tends to be a little lower. We've been coming up over the last 5 years. We were at about 38% in 2020. That's gone to 43 to 45 to 46, and then 56 this year.
Thank you.
Yep.
With the harvest of 500, 600, 700 animals this year, okay, and with your Cougar estimates of 12 to 1400, how sustainable is that degree of harvest with that population?
Yeah. So one thing I always try to point out with that population model is that's an absolute minimum adult population. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. But basically what that is doing is using our age of harvest and back calculating an estimate. So there's a couple things. One, it's always a couple years old because we don't get a representation of yearlings and kittens in the harvest because they're illegal to take, at least kittens are. And it also, again, it doesn't take into account any natural mortality. So what's really helpful in that model is the trend over time. When you add some additional mortality to that, the line doesn't change, but it shifts, and the overall number estimate changes year to year. So having said that, I think the take home from that graph is that it does appear that we peaked probably in 2018-ish, and we've seen some leveling off and then some reduction. But again, that only runs through, I think, 2021, if I remember correctly, and I could pull that up if it's helpful.
Are you referring to the population growth chart?
Right.
Yeah, which showed an all-time low this past, whatever the day of the last metric was.
Right. Yeah. So it does look like there's been a shift and that we are starting to see a decline. And in some ways that's by design. Even before the legislation took place, we did have some directives from the legislature about, units that weren't meeting their mule deer population goals needed to have predator management actions taken. And we did that. So it's been a process. So over the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of units in the state we've been harvesting a lot of mountain lions. One thing to bear in mind too with mountain lion biology is that you tend to have a source and sink dynamic across the landscape. And so it's based on primarily on access. So most cougar hunting takes place in the winter. Even the trapping is a winter activity in conjunction with bobcat trapping, at least at the moment. And that tends to limit where people can go to hunt. And so cougars that are in areas that with no winter access tend to be source populations for areas that maybe get some heavy harvest. And so you see animals moving into those sink locations. And that probably is something that will remain in effect regardless of the management strategy.
Darren, did I hear you say that the Wildlife Board could make recommendations about trap types?
Yeah, I think within the legislative language, trapping must be allowed. But I think that if the Wildlife Board was inclined, they could certainly regulate around how we trap.
So hypothetically, we could ask them to suggest the removal of neck snares.
Right. Yeah, that'd be something I think that the regional councils could suggest. Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Darren.
That all you have? Any other questions from the RAC?
I've got a procedural question. Since this is an informational topic, are we allowed to make motions and?
We're not.
Okay.
According to my boss right here.
Yeah, I don't think we're able to make motions. It's been announced as an informational topic, so not an action topic for the RAC.
Any questions from the public? And we don't have any review, right?
We did.
Okay, turn the time over to Jason for public feedback.
We did have some feedback for this topic. We had 5 people respond. 3 strongly agreed, which is 60%. 1 somewhat agreed, which is 20%, and 1 strongly disagreed, which is 20%. We had 1 comment, and it says, "I think legislators should stay out of hunting. I think there needs to be tags for lions, and I would much rather chase lions than hunt deer."
I guess I can bring it back for any discussion that we want to have. We can't make an action on this, but is there anything somebody wants to discuss online or from here?
Well, if I may, I'll just reiterate, I would be incredibly in favor of the Wildlife Board considering removing neck snares at their discretion, of course, but I think it would be a very good thing for a lot of reasons. And again, I think that the trajectory that we're on, based on a lot of the data that you presented, Darren, is a very likely end of cougar population in the state of Utah if this trend continues for another few years. Thanks.
Okay. Anything else on this?
Well, I just think that I would hope the division watches this and can recommend, some kind of changes if the cougar population does start to really plummet like it possibly could. I've got some trust in Darren that the DWR will do what they can to head off some of those situations.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the CWMU rule amendment. I will invite Chad up, maybe give a brief synopsis, 30 seconds. However much time you need, Chad.
I was going to say 30 seconds, that's going to be hard. We'll see how I do this early in a meeting. It's been a while since I've gone this early. But the Wildlife Board last year asked us to review the CWMU rule. So we got a committee together, met I think 9 times over just under a year. Came up with some recommendations. I don't know if you want me to go into all of those recommendations or not, because there's a little bit of a list. But these private land programs are always a little bit tricky. There's a lot of compromise. There's a lot of strong feelings in both directions. So to be able to have a committee get together and hash some of those things out and come up with these recommendations, I felt was really good. But yeah, maybe it might be better to just have questions on specific recommendations. I don't know.
Questions for Chad. Chad, I have one to start. I thought on the committee, we voted when somebody comes before the advisory committee that one of the options will be implemented, not may be implemented. And Mike's nodding his head yes.
I could go back and look at that meeting, the minutes of that. I guess there are times when people do come to the advisory committee, like in the past where there's been no recommended action against them. So let's just say if there was a complaint from a hunter and the CWMU comes in and the complaint's unfounded by the advisory committee, now they have to put them on probation or.
No, I thought it was when they weren't meeting like their harvest and stuff like that, and they came before the committee, then one of those things would be implemented, not necessarily when a hunter complains about the experience they had.
So more specifically talking about the antlerless elk harvest.
Yes.
That one of them will be. Yeah, I can go back and look at the minutes. If that's the case, I missed it.
I don't know. That's the only thing I noticed as I listened to your presentation, but
Let me see.
Mike's nodding his head yes, so that gives me a little affirmation. I don't know. There's two other people in here that were there. I don't remember. Braden, question for Chad?
First, Chad, how did you draw such a good position in the RAC? Great job. Whatever you did, great job. No, maybe Chad, could you just give us a synopsis about how the committee worked? Maybe just like a 2-minute overview again for those that didn't watch the presentation about just kind of who was part of that committee and you met 9 times, but who was kind of the makeup of the committee?
Yeah, so we tried our best to make it so there's representation on both CWMUs, and then a lot of the voices that we'd hear that would somewhat complain about part of the program, we try to get a lot of them on there as well. So we try to make it so there was voices for both sides of that. Yeah. And then when we met, just we would come up with discussions and try to have an open forum where everybody could speak their mind. And yeah, I don't know. Did you want more than that or anything more specific?
No, I think just how did you guys get to the kind of the final outcome of these recommendations? Was it just kind of the group saying, hey, I think we're in a good spot, consensus driven, or was it like a vote? How did that all work?
We did a lot of votes. We knew we probably weren't going to get consensus on all of them. And then we even reserved the right, as a committee or as the division, it's a recommendation committee to us. So there's probably some and probably at least one thing that we have in here that we didn't talk about with the committee that the division came up with the recommendation. So we did feel like we heard enough from the committees to have a pretty good idea what direction and to give us an idea of where we felt we needed to go as a division.
I will say, Braden, we had a lot of lengthy discussions, and I think for the most part, everybody on that committee spoke their mind. Of course, all the votes didn't go how everybody wanted them to go, but there was some good discussion.
So Chad, we just went over the CWMU antlerless permit recommendations in the last RAC cycle. And looking at the proposal that any unit over 10% would fall into your antlerless, the new antlerless elk management system for CWMUs. How many of those CWMUs took more tags last RAC cycle? Am I wrong to think that it was a small number that took more antlerless elk tags in those units that would now qualify under this, the new proposed management strategies?
No, there wasn't a lot of additional tags. And that's the case almost every year.
Almost every year. Okay, so that's good. So what incentive is there for the CWMUs to give additional cow elk tags? Because deer aren't an issue, am I correct?
Yeah, usually we don't have very many with doe tags.
Okay, so with antlerless elk, what's the incentive for CWMUs to take more more antlerless elk tags under this current proposed system if they can just get those privately given to them after the fact.
Say that one more time.
So
Let me process that one.
okay, so if a CWMU selects a 90-10 bull buck split, 100% of the antlerless opportunity goes to the public. So if a CWMU historically has taken, a certain number of tags, and their CWMU falls in one of these units that now reaches the threshold to implement your new antlerless strategies, which essentially gives private tag or the antlerless opportunity to the private CWMUs, what's the incentive for them to choose those tags earlier so they go to the public rather than later so they come to them as private?
I think I see what you're saying now, and there probably isn't a big incentive there, but kind of back to I think where we landed on this was back to your original point is a lot of times we weren't getting additional permits out of those CWMUs anyway. A lot of those CWMUs were feeling like they're maxing out their harvest. So
if they feel like they're maxing out their harvest, but then now they feel like they can harvest more with private tags?
no, I don't. So the new way that we did this from the committee, so this is a little bit different. This recommendation is a little bit different than what we ended on as the committee, right? That we had some shalls in there as well on this, and we backed off of that, and it's for that reason. So if you're in a unit that's over objective, and those tools can be put into place, the division is going to make recommendations of which tools will be used for which CWMUs. So potentially going forward, there could be CWMUs that we say what you're doing currently is enough, and that's what we need out of you, and it just completely stays the same. I think if there was a place too where we started seeing more elk on some of these CWMUs too, more residential elk specifically, that we still have that ability to come in and say we recommend additional public tags, that it's not necessarily cut and dry. So I could see scenarios where if there was some at times too, there's transitional elk, right? So if they got all their harvest and then they have a transitional elk, we wanted to reserve that right to say either do a depredation hunt where we could call public hunters, which is our first choice. That's what we'd want to do and try to do. But if it was one where the timing just wasn't going to happen, like they're just going to pass through really quick, that we'd have that ability to at least get some elk harvested. So it's a way, I guess it's a way to not have the public hunt fail. Like we could double somebody's tags, and if what they can harvest, like if they had 10 and we could say take 20, but if what they can harvest is 10, potentially there'd be a lot of years where the other 10 didn't harvest is kind of the thought. Does that answer it?
Yeah, that does. So I liked the first portion when you said there's really no incentive, because that's the way I kind of see it too. So the DWR allowed public comment to be given to the CWMU committee, and that public comment mainly revolved around the public felt that the splits were unfair and that the hunt dates were that should be adjusted. And why isn't there anything in this proposal that addresses CWMU splits?
Because we landed on specifically the division. First meeting, I stood up and said that the division wasn't looking to make a recommendation and split change. We did still talk about it. We discussed it, and where we ended up was to not have a change. So I didn't highlight anything that wasn't changed, so that's why it wasn't mentioned.
That's great. I like that answer, and I tend to agree with that. And my other question will be, if a CWMU, say they get 20 antlerless tags and they give those through the draw. And then they qualify for these additional private tags and they get 20 more. What's that split now?
That for total tags.
Yeah, what would that be? What?
It'd be 50/50.
It'd be 50/50. So the division's not willing to change their permit splits until they are willing to change their permit splits.
So I guess it'd be a little bit different because this would be over objective units only. So our main thought on this, and this came out after the big winter, right? Like we had so many elk on that unit that it hurt, or is widely speculated that it really hurt the deer.
Mhm.
So our main emphasis is just to try to protect the range and try to protect those over objective units, and get those back to objectives. So hopefully we're not damaging the habitat, is mainly what we're trying to do there.
Okay, thanks.
Chief Rice,
Chad,
and then Braden.
oh, sorry, Braden. Chad, how are you? Quick question. You mentioned transition elk as like maybe a migratory time frame when we're worried about these elk showing up but not having an opportunity to take some of them, harvest some of them before they leave the property. I think that's actually a fine thing, isn't it? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they're moving from a CWMU where we don't necessarily want them and they're leaving that area, wouldn't we rather encourage them to just leave and go on to public or another property?
But I think that would typically, yes. If you're running a couple thousand elk over objective, I think we'd like to see them harvested, like in some of these areas at CWMU, then CWMU, then CWMU. And if you could harvest additional ones on each and every one of those coming down to the public, I think that would be our ultimate preferred choice. And that would be it. And to be clear on that one, that one's a tool. It's the last one. Like we want to use all the other ones first. But yeah, but we also want it to be like if there's the ability to harvest some more cow elk, and we don't want to just ignore it if it's hurting the habitat and hurting deer. So
Thank you. It was perfect.
Go ahead, Braden.
Sorry, this online stuff's harder because you're trying to participate and not interrupt. So thanks. Chad, I don't want to change too much off the antler list, but I did have a question with the non-contiguous acreage. So it looks like in the rule, non-contiguous land can be added if there's 640 acres and if the person already has a CWMU. Does it have to be that they have like a deer CWMU that can have additional non-contiguous? Or like, can they have a deer CWMU and then say, hey, I want to add another 640 plus and become an elk CWMU? Like maybe get to that a little bit more. I was looking at the landowner rule and the CWMU rule. There might be some conflicts there when you start adding a bunch of non-contiguous pieces into the.
yeah, so the non-contiguous has to be within 4 miles of the contiguous piece, and it can't be used to meet minimum requirements. So that main chunk is what you're going to be judged off of. So if you're at 7,000 acres, and even if you had another 3,000 acres that was 3 miles away, you could add that in, but we're not going to add it as a moose or an elk CWMU. It's still be deer or pronghorn.
That's what I want to make sure. I thought I don't want to have people buying these little 640s or whatever and adding 2 and having this weird line of properties.
Yeah, and it won't keep chaining out. So if it's within 4 miles of the main piece, then we can add it. If not, then we can't.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from the RAC? Questions from the public? Come up, state your name, who you represent, and ask your question.
My name is Garrett Slatkoff. I'm here representing the Utah chapter, Backcountry Hunters in English. In the video, you mentioned that the CWMUs are going to have to come before the regional council or for the committee, I believe, to explain how they are trying to get public harvest. That was correct? I understood that. Cool. Can you explain a little bit further about what criteria they're going to be judged on, or how they're supposed to show that they are attempting to get that public harvest?
Yeah, so a couple of things I mentioned, and there are probably the main things will be how many days they allowed them. So by rule, they have to allow them 3 days. Allowing the minimum probably isn't going to suffice in that scenario, right? So probably additional days. And if there's additional guidance or even with a guide that they could give, just to show that they put forth a good faith effort. It's hard to write that really specific because there are times where CWMUs will call a public hunter and they'll say, yeah, I drew a bunch of other tags. This is very low priority. So I guess you can't force everybody to come out. And there's different levels of hunters in general, right? So some will put forth an extra effort to try to harvest and potentially some won't.
Thanks. That's it.
Thank you, Garrett. Any other questions? Turn the time over to Darren for public comment.
All right, we had 17 people respond to this question, which best describes their position regarding the recommended changes to Administrative Rule R65737. Of the 17, we had 11 that strongly agreed, or 65%, 4 that somewhat agreed, or 24%, and 2 that somewhat disagreed, for 12%. The weighted average was 4.41. We had quite a few people make comments online, and I'm going to take a few minutes to try to summarize those. There were quite a few people that in one way or another used an adjective like great, best, amazing, or fair, and they really loved the CWMU program. There were about 7 comments that revolved around that, about loving the program. And there was one that said, love the program, would like to see a standard set for at least 2 guests, along with a hunter on the guided hunts. There were 2 comments revolving on the number of guests. People that hadn't even drawn but have been an observer on the hunts have enjoyed and support the program. Reports of good interactions with landowners they've had over the last 6 years on CWMUs. There was a comment, they'd like to see a higher split than 90-10 and would like to see CWMU hunt dates align with general season to disperse hunters. There was a comment for discontent with hunters that have drawn will have an opportunity to get an additional permit, which takes away from other hunters. Comment not in favor of giving away private cow permits, and the CWMU should be given a different split if they need to remove additional cows. Like to see DWR keep the hunt planner updated to contact CWMUs. Specifically, somebody had been trying to contact CWMUs and some of the information online was not accurate or up to date. Comment, support the trade lands and contiguous acres changes, and support giving the CWMU advisory committee guidance and direction for when they need to make decisions. And that's what I have.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for public comment. If you're representing an individual, you'll have 3 minutes. If you're representing an organization, you'll have 5 minutes. We will start when you come up, state your name and who you represent, and then make your comment. We'll start with Corey Reese. And that's all we.
My name is Cody Reese. I'm here on behalf of Youth Hunters Voice. I think probably start by saying I think you guys he's got a big job. So I'm just here tonight to give our opinion of the CWMU rule amendments and recommendations. The CWMU Association has been one of the largest supporters of Youth Hunter Voice and continues to outperform any other organization to put youth in the field. They've been awesome for us. The CWMU Association and the CWMU committee members have always been great advocates for us. They've helped create a lot of opportunities for youth. I personally know many people that are on that CWMU committee, and I've heard a lot of the back and forths. Sorry, can you not hear me? So I've heard a lot of the back and forths. I've heard a lot of the discussions. I've heard a lot of the debates, and I'm here today to just let you guys know that we are in full support and recommended of the proposal that they gave you on the agenda tonight. It was, I mean, it's been diligently discussed, debated, orchestrated by these people that have been put in place to do their job. So the adjustments, like in our opinion and the CWMU opinions have specifically addressed all the concerns that were left on the table, and it's a very good draft to move forward with. So we would really like to thank all the committee members, the CWMU committee members, because they did a fantastic job of like coming together and from different sides. Like Chad said, we had guys from clear over here to clear over there, and they really did come together and present something good for you guys. So thanks a lot. Thanks you guys.
Thank you, Cody. Dave Freese.
Or Dave Freisbrock, but
Sorry, buddy.
I'm gonna give you a pass on that one.
I'm doing it on purpose.
Dave Freis, I'm the acting president of the CWMU Association. I've served on a lot of these committees, and all of them present different challenges. I mean, to go without saying, it's difficult sometimes. In that committee, we had lively debate. You two were there, and there was a lot from the CWMU side that was there. And I feel like as we met and discussed things, the two sides were trying to find common ground, but there are some challenging issues that just are tough. Overall, I think the CWMU program is one of the most successful private lands programs anywhere. And my concern going forward with the CWMU program, honestly, is if we don't hit the right line between private and public, I think we'll see privatization of wildlife in Utah. And I don't want to see that. Our association doesn't want to see that. So there's this real fine line. The cow elk issue is one of those that's really the hardest line to hit, because we have a cow elk problem, and we need less cow elk. And so the way the splits currently work, and Mike articulated that with Chad a little bit, that split could potentially change if we allowed private hunting on cow elk. But the problem is such that I don't know if there's another solution to it. And I don't think the CWMUs are looking at it as, okay, this is an opportunity for us to make more money or do something different. But the division has this fine line that they kind of have to walk, and they've done a good job with it, because they've they've encouraged CWMUs to kill cow elk, and they've done it fairly successfully. It's just in these over objective units now where we have these issues that's kind of it's taking on a new life. And I think that's where we hit a disagreement. But other than that, I felt like the CWMU side and the opposing side came to consensus on a lot of really good things. That one is the sticking point. And it's hard, because if you have CWMUs get out of the program, we're not going to have that same control that we do now. And that's my biggest fear with that particular issue, is that would force some out of the program. And but other than that, we support the recommendations of the division, even though there's some of them that we don't like. We support them, and we will take our medicine where we have to.
Thank you, Dave Freis. Okay, bring it back to the committee for discussion.
Well, as was stated, I was on the committee, and I was there I felt like to represent the public. I know sometimes I come across as kind of maybe more against the CWMU program than I really am. I think it's a great program. I think that it's been a really good program overall. It concerns me when that committee it was a tough committee. I've been on a lot of committees. It was a tough committee. It put strains on friendships. It was a difficult situation. And I think it's good for the public to know that. So I'm just going to say what I say. tonight. You know, that there was a lot more CWMU representation on that committee than non-CWMU. And so some of the stuff that got passed, you know, was by consensus. And as Dave stated, it was a sticky situation with the elk, because in the end, what this does is it takes the public's opportunity from the cooperative side and it shifts it to the private side. And that's been a real heavy issue to people that have talked to me. I appreciate what the division's trying to do. And like Dave said, they have to walk a fine line here. But the CWMUs haven't been good at killing elk. That's why we're in this situation. They haven't been good at that. Like I've been on the CWMU advisory committee for years, and we've had special meetings with them. And then when Chad brings forth the antlerless elk recommendations, there's no change. They're not taking more. And so it's hard for me to see the direction we're going to head is not to incentivize them or de-incentivize the taking of those antlerless tags after the public gets theirs. Like looking through it, like units that will qualify under this is like the Wasatch Abenaquan, the Wasatch Current Creek. Like those aren't units in the north part of the state that has all the issues. But what this could essentially do is allow those CWMUs to get a minimal number of public cow antlerless elk hunters, and then get a more substantial number of private antlerless elk tags. And I won't be able to vote for that portion. I can't. I didn't on that committee, and I can't here. So I support the rest of it. I think it's good. I think there's some compromises there. But I won't be able to support the antlerless portion. And I will state, we need to kill cow elk. We need to kill them. They are damaging the habitat. They're putting a strain on mule deer populations. I just think that what's been presented doesn't give anything back to the public. Like maybe if they take more cow tags as private, they give back an antler tag or something like that. There's got to be some other kind of mechanism there, but that's kind of where I sit with it.
Okay, Braden.
Yeah, I guess back to Mike.
Discussion.
Back to Mike's comment, and maybe just I need to understand this better. I've heard a few people say this doesn't give opportunity to the public, this second tag. I see this as an amazing opportunity. Working up at, one of these ranches that isn't an area over objective elk. If I have a deer tag and I draw that deer tag as a public hunter, I can then be given a antlerless tag and said, hey, if you see a cow elk, you can shoot it. So when I hear that, I think, wow, what an opportunity. I can shoot a deer and an elk while up on this unit hunting. That's something that the public's never had before. So I've been hearing that we take away public opportunity, and I'm not sure where that's coming from. So maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
Well, just to clarify that, and I do agree, and on a unit, that has substantial, public draw hunters, such as, some of the bigger CWMUs, but on a CWMU that has, 10 deer tags or 20 deer tags, that's only 2 public that get to shoot them, but that's 18 private that get to shoot them. And so, it's a tool in the toolbox, but that tool is taking away from the splits that the CWMUs and the division were completely against addressing with the buck and bull side. And I'll be honest, I didn't push to change those because I feel like they've been in place for so long. But there's been a push to change the other side. There's two sides to that table, the buck and bull side, and then the antlerless side. And the public gets 90% of their hunting opportunity on the antlerless side, and that could dwindle substantially.
Chad, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to clarify, just make sure everybody's aware. So like if the unit is over objective, the division will make that recommendation of if they'd use any of those tools. So it's not, if you're in a unit that's over objective, it's not necessarily that you do automatically get those other tools. That'd be a division recommendation, which would go to the wildlife board. And then the board would choose whether to approve it or not. So there'd be potential, but it's not a guarantee that if you're in one of those units that you get those additional opportunities.
Thank you, Chad. Any other comments from the RAC? I'll say I was on the committee and I felt like I burned some bridges on that committee, and I've worried about it since that committee, and my relationships with people are maybe to me a little more important than who kills a cow. So I really respect what Mike's saying and I generally agree with him, but my relationships with people are more important than who kills a cow to me. And so I've probably had my vote on this. I'm not sure if I even vote tonight just because I don't vote unless it's a tie, but I've had my vote on this on the committee. But that's where I was from the committee. I really felt bad that I think some of my relationships were harmed. Go ahead, Bryce.
Can I ask a question of Chad real fast? Is that okay? I know the question.
I think it's fine.
Chad, just real fast, I'm curious to know how many of these CWMUs are over objective currently? Do we know that?
I don't have that number. It's fair to say Unit 4 is over objective in Chalk Creek. So Morgan South Ridge and Chalk Creek, East Canyon, those three for sure.
So it's not a lot. It's not a ton of them.
Unit 4, how many?
Unit 4 is significantly over. Yeah,
I know, but how many CWUs in Unit 4? A
10
dozen?
10 or- It's 80% of that unit is CWMUs. So it's like, I don't know how many there are, but acreage wise, it's pretty much the whole unit.
And how many head over objective are we currently?
I wish the Northern region was here. I think it's about 2,000.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard place to land. I just think that here's my worry. I like the CWMU program. And if we pass something that allows CWMUs to just go slaughter cow elk outside of what we've done for 30 years, it's going to be a huge detriment to the CWMU program. And I agree with what Dave said. You know, I mean, we don't want to make changes that take away a good program. And I'm not saying that I have the answers to do that, but I just worry that, I mean, once people start to realize, wait, you know, I mean, we just shot how many more elk on a CWMU and didn't give that to the public? The DWR has already been doing it. I mean, it's a really hard spot to be in. I wish that the CWMUs, they were offered like more bull tags and more of that situation, but they didn't want anything to do with that. This is just antlerless tags. I mean, they've got a bull to cow ratio of almost 1-to-1. So if we go in and kill a bunch more cows, you're going to have more bulls than cows. And I think the public needs to know that. That was discussed in the committee, and the reason why I'm saying these things is so people can be aware. People need to be educated of this, of what's going on, but I've said my piece.
Thank you, Mike. Any other discussion? I would entertain motions.
I make a motion that we accept the CWMU rule except for the cow elk management strategies.
Do we have a second? So we have a motion on the table with a second that we accept the CWMU rule amendments as presented with the exception of the cow elk management strategies for when over objective.
Yes, and I want to clarify that I want to address that, all that portion. And then if somebody wants to make a motion concerning the cow elk strategies, that's still on the table. This motion doesn't shoot down that portion.
So we could still make a motion
Yes.
about the cow elk management strategies.
Yes.
Any discussion on the motion?
What exactly is the motion?
The motion is that we accept the division's recommendation as presented with the exception of the cow elk management strategies when a unit is over objective.
Okay, I'll second that.
Braden, go ahead.
I was going to ask, I guess I'm not against this motion, except for I want to talk about the antler list and make sure those tools aren't just taken out of the toolbox, right? So where's the sense in the room? Are we thinking we want to do a different split? I guess Mike or whoever else, I'd like to just know what ideas are we thinking about with antler list? Are we looking at like a different tool we want to explore, or what are the ideas?
I mean, like the CWMU should give a little more. I mean, there should be, if they're going to take a portion of the public split, maybe they give back a little bit to their other split. Was an idea that I was presented with from a couple public members who obviously didn't comment. So, and if the RAC feels like they want to go with what the division's presented, then that's fine too.
I think that's where we're at right now. Let's decide if we want to discuss this further by voting on this motion, or if we don't want to discuss it further by voting on. So if you vote in favor of this motion, we're going to discuss potential strategies or recommendations we could make. And if we turn down this motion, we'll go back to and ask for a general motion. Does that make sense, Braden? And everybody else? Any other comments on the motion that's on the table? Okay, I'll call for a vote. All of those that are in favor of the motion to accept the division's recommendation as presented with the exception of the cow elk harvest management strategies when a unit is over objective, vote yes. And those that are opposed? So that motion appears to have passed 5-1 on the online people. Braden, you were against, but Brooke, Josh, and Jim, you were in favor?
Yes.
So yes,
Correct.
motion passes. The motion passes 6-1. 6-1. Okay, so now we can have a discussion about maybe what we would, if we want to solve the world's problem on cow management strategies, or if we want to kick the can. I think it behooves us that we make some suggestions. If we're gonna say we don't pass so it is as presented, we make some suggestions on how we would like to see it fixed.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
So I'm still kind of confused. In all the public sentiment that I heard and those being represented by different groups, everybody seemed pretty positive about the CWMU and how great it is and how great it is for Utah. And yet it just seems like when we touch CWMU, there's always these individuals within a RAC committee that just has these personal grievances. And I hear what Mike's saying, and he's definitely an expert, but I'm just trying to figure out, it must be a personal thing, because everything that I heard would have supported the experts, the CWMUs, and I'm just surprised we're peeling this off for some maybe a personal thing. So maybe, Mike, could you explain better to me why the importance of managing cow elk is not the number one thing, and it's more about who gets it, private or public?
Okay, well, first off, I will adamantly say there's nothing personal here. Zero personal. Number two is I'm not an expert. but I've been involved in it long enough to see that the public's portion of the splits, which were non-negotiable, are now negotiable and being diluted. And I vote in favor of everything else except for that, because we're touching on the public's opportunity. And I represent the public. So there's nothing personal. That kind of is offensive to me. My problem is I have been in a lot of meetings where CWMUs were brought forth and told, we need you guys to help manage these elk herds. And the CWMUs don't take more tags. And Chad's already said that today. And we can go back and look at all the data. And so the reason why I am against it is because it dilutes the public's portion. If this RAC was going to dilute the CWMU's buck and bull tags, they would have been standing at the mic against it. And the other thing, when you said all the feedback we've had, if you look at the names on those, and every citizen in Utah can submit their comments, and that's a good thing. But the names on most of the positive ones were CWMU owners and their families. And the division only had that public comment open for like 55 hours. So, and we're in the middle of May. People are planning vacations and they've got other things to do. But the committee received 61 inputs that I've received. I don't know if they received more through their they had an online comment. And of those people, like almost 30% of them wanted the CWMUs to have less tags through their splits. Many of them wanted them to have different hunt dates. You know, maybe the RACs should have received all the comments given to the CWMU committee. And so yeah.
So I think Mike just summarized it really well. The comments that were received by the committee were not mostly in favor. They wanted to see some significant change, and we largely didn't change anything on that committee. And anyway, I mean, I think this is a serious issue because this is the one place where I think Mike's illustrated the problem, and it's the problem we had on the committee as well. I mean, there is a fine line, and we had long discussions about this. And I think the public should be aware of those long discussions, as Mike's pointed out, and the problems with them. And that is that these ideas will take from the public portion of a 90-10 split.
So, Mr. Chairman, may I just say one last thing?
You bet.
I want to apologize to Mike. I have the utmost respect for Mike. I meant nothing personal. I meant your own personal opinion, not anything else. So thank you for explaining that to me. But you know how much I love you, Mike. It was nothing to do with that. So I apologize that it came across that way.
Thank you, Jim.
We're going to have Bryce and then Braden.
Hold on again, Braden. I would just like to echo a lot of what Mike said. And I also represent the public, and because I sat here and didn't have anything to say during the comment section does not mean that I wasn't feeling a certain something. I feel like Mike nailed it on the head and said everything that I would say. And I probably should have said, I agree with everything Mike said, because I do. I also feel strongly that if public opportunity is taken away, it's at a great cost. I mean, that's what we're here to do. It's a publicly owned resource. And while they do live a lot of the time, or can, on private land, it still belongs to the public. And since I represent the public, I feel very strongly that we should do anything and everything we can to make sure that the public opportunity is maximized. If that means make some change in things, then let's make those changes. if that's what the public is crying for. I don't necessarily agree with everything about the CWMU programs, but I also do see value in it. And I do understand that it's a pretty darn good program. There's nothing out there that's perfect. And I think that we have an opportunity here to make some changes if the Wildlife Board would see fit. I mean, I say that with a big if.
Okay, go ahead, Braden.
I guess where I'm at is what solutions can we put on the table then? You know, as representing a landowner and working with many landowners that have these over objective issues, you know, what are some ideas that are out there? Having not been to the committee meetings and not attended them, you know, maybe we start small and say we recommend that all public draw hunters get a second tag. Like I just want to give more tools, and I hate to say, hey, we're taking that tool off the table just because it's not the exact solution we would like. So, you know, and you know, the other thing when I go back and look at complaints against CWMUs, I guess the second comment here, I don't see any complaints last year that the Division of Wildlife got on any CWMU last year. I think it was 0. And so when I hear all these people are not happy with CWMUs, I go back and look at the complaint log. I think last year there was not one complaint. So once again, you know, public comment, that's a pretty big deal. Those that had tags there, I don't think there was any complaints. So I guess those are my two comments: is what tools are we going to put forward then to address this issue? And then the second one is, if I look back at public record, there are no complaints against CWMUs. So I think that's my other broader comment.
So I like that, Braden, and I think you're right. I think the operators do a great job, so they don't get complaints because they do a great job. I think on the committee, the comments came from the people, not the hunters that get to log what their experience was, but the general public that maybe wants to see the experience a little different. But I agree with you. Most of the operators do a tremendous job, and they get very, very few, if any, complaints.
I agree with that too. And I like what you said. Give every public hunter the second tag. And then, you know, the CWMU should take more public tags. When they're over objective, and maybe they need to be more flexible on their dates that they can hunt. I did like what Chad said, is that, you know, if somebody came before the advisory committee because they weren't meeting their, you know, harvest objectives and they only gave the 3 days, well, why didn't you give more days? But that's not in the rule. And so that sentiment's great, but it's not in the rule. So, you know, minimum of 3 days. If you are, you know, if the unit's over objective, then minimum of 1 week. You know, I don't know. I don't want to wordsmith it, because, I mean, as Brock said, you know, this has been discussed ad nauseum, but I don't know.
I mean, it could be something as simple as the benefit to the public in the splits. There has to be a benefit, a greater benefit to the public in the splits than the private on the antlers or something to the similar. I mean, I can see the problem they have. Some of those units can't take any more public hunters. They're booked up the entire season, and they've got too many elks. They've got to do something. So give every public hunter another tag, and we still can't solve it, then I'm much more open to an idea like this. But that's where I'm at, kind of.
Yeah, I agree. Do that and then go to all these other options that are on the table. But the first attempt should be a good faith attempt made with the public. And if that doesn't work, especially on some of these big CWMUs, you know, we've got CWMUs that are, the CWMU itself is 1,000 elk over objective, you know, so I can see that there's an issue there. So implement some of these strategies, and then on top of that, maybe implement the rest of the strategies.
I don't know if we want to make a motion. Do we want to express that opinion? It looks like Covey's going to come up and give us his opinion. Wildlife Chief Jones, let's hear it.
Mr. Chair, may I say something? Is that okay?
We'd love it, buddy.
Okay. I want to point something out and acknowledge something here. And that is, it feels like we're in this, I call it the dead right scenario, right? There's this gentleman standing on a street corner and there's a red light and he steps out from the red light and he walks onto the sidewalk in the crosswalk and he sees the semi come barreling down the hill and he raises his hand and he's yelling at the semi because he is right, darn it, right? He's in the right, the light's red. And as the semi hits him and kills him, and that's the end. So that's kind of the situation that the division's in with elk on some of these units. Okay, we're in a situation where we are damaging habitat, right? It is our job to protect, preserve, and maintain wildlife for generations. And we're in a situation where we're going to end up where habitat is degraded so far that you can't carry elk and you can't carry deer. And you end up with populations that are a lot lower than what they could be. And so when we developed these tools, we kept it in the rule that it would be a recommendation, be vetted by the public again, explain the background, and we understood that we were giving a little bit, that we couldn't afford to be dead right, right? And it's a really hard situation to be in. But when I look at this, and over my career and over our careers, I don't want to look back and say, well, that unit used to hold comfortably 4,000 elk without having any damage, and it would also hold mule deer. And because we couldn't get the harvest we needed, now it holds far less elk and far less mule deer. And so as you evaluate these strategies, I guess as a RAC and as a group, please keep that in mind. That's the perspective that we're coming from. That's the fine line that Mike was talking about. And we've tried for years to get this under control, and we're not there as an agency and in cooperation with CWMUs. And a lot of these are issuing a lot of public permits, and we will watch that. We will continue to watch that. Now, you may disagree with that, you may agree with that, and that's okay. But I wanted you to understand where we were coming from.
Thanks, Kobe. I don't think anybody on here disagrees that there's a problem, and it's a complex problem that doesn't have a simple answer. I mean, I don't think anybody. I mean, we were on the committee. I know it's a problem, and I'm not sure. I don't know what the solution is. Do we want to make a motion, or do we want?
Brock, before you go to a motion, I have a question / comment.
Go ahead, Josh.
I wonder if, and I don't know if Chad or Kobe has this answer, but I wonder if the CWMUs that are most over objective are all within that 90-10 split category, because it seems like if that's the issue, then that split category maybe ought to be examined.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion about that, and most are at 90-10. I don't know if all of them are, but probably pretty darn close, if not. Part of the other considerations when we talked about splits was now in the state of Utah in a general season unit, you can hunt a lot of days without being a CWMU between archery, rifle, late rifle, unlimited tags, muzzleloader, enough so that the CWMUs have said to us, like, at what point is it better just for me to get out of the CWMU program and just not hunt any cow elk? Just take those tags that we want and just buy tags and sell trespass. That's a potential reality. I think that's part of the reason why we landed where we did, is if it goes that direction, and I've heard people say they think it's a threat, and maybe it is. Are we willing to call the bluff on it? If it goes that direction, Deseret alone has 310 tags. If they decided to do it, there's 310 public opportunities gone away. But even if the other ones, if you add them up, it's like how much opportunity do we lose? So to maintain those splits and those situations, we're potentially going to have less antlerless tags for the public, and they would just do private lands only. That was part of the consideration for us during this process. And we acknowledge that, yeah, we said that we're not going to change splits. We're not interested in that. And I think with the ability of CWMUs and what we have for elk hunting in the current status, that's a potential that could happen. So yeah, like I said, it'd be, I guess, if you want to call their bluff and see if they would really leave or not, I guess can go through the public process and we can see, but it's potential.
Quick question for you. What's the ideal bull to cow ratio on these units?
Yeah, not what it's at for sure, but I don't know, like what, 30? We really don't. We mostly manage elk by age, so we don't do bull cow ratios. But I mean, we've talked about it with mule deer a lot, right? Like as long as you have enough to breed the cows. In this case, maybe we don't want all the cows bred because we're way over objective. But
is there any role for a less aggressive predator management program on these units?
I mean,
to obviously take down the elk population.
Yeah, I think that's hard with the new law that was passed because I mean, you can hunt cougars year round, so I don't know that we could tell people to not hunt them at this point. Like, I think that would probably take a law change.
Understood. Just a little collateral effect of the law change. Got it.
Hey, Chad, while you're there, since you won't have to be in with these meetings for a long time, we'll get our money's worth tonight. Like Braden's extending of the olive branch of giving every public hunter an additional cow tag or two, because you can have up to 3 cow tags, or 2 or 3, 2. Is that something that you could work into the rule fairly easily, or would that be difficult for you to work into the rule, where the first step is to have the CWMUs give more tags in general? The second step would be like to give the public hunters additional cow tags.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess that is part of the plan, is what I'd see it as, is that that would be something we're going to do. My thoughts are a little bit go along the lines of we're 2,000 elk over objective, to roll in that and then just wait to have all those other tools. Does it get to a point where it's too late? Like, would we be better off using all of the tools that we can to get back to objective and then potentially doing that? Maybe that's a better way, but I think as a division, we just feel like we're in dire need of getting back to objective as quickly as we can. And so my preference would be is that we have all the tools that we're able to use. But I see what you're saying, like potentially in the future, like if we get back to objective, then the first year that these things go into effect, yeah, maybe let's just roll that out just to the public. And with that being our recommendation, like our recommendation is that we would make those recommendations and it'd come through this process. So we'd be able to have those discussions at those times.
Thanks. So I'm going to say one other thing. I think it's hugely important that we have the discussions in the public setting, on public record. We had these discussions behind closed doors in a committee where the public probably can watch it, but it's not widely available. And so I think this kind of information being out there that we can refer the public to, hey, go watch this, public presentation. Maybe they can be informed of why the division wants to do what it's doing. Because I appreciated your presentation that you gave on for this meeting, but I think this kind of makes it a little bit more raw, and maybe it's a little bit more important to look at. So
I don't know if we want a motion. I mean, 3 board members are here. They've heard our motion that we passed. They've heard our concerns. And I don't know that, I think that it's going to be represented. I'd be fine just moving on. I don't know what the rest of you want to do.
I think we should have a motion that pertains to that portion that we did.
Okay, let's hear it.
Braden.
Well, I think I would want to make a motion. It's gonna be a little broader, maybe than what I offered, Mike, but I think the motion would be that the Division of Wildlife would explore options to first give preference to those public draw hunters, whether they're antlerless or antlered. And then if they still need to meet certain harvest objectives, to then explore giving tags to other permitted hunters. Is that too broad? I don't know. That's what I'm thinking right now. That's where my mind's at. To have a preference, kind of give it first to the public, and then if there's still that need, they can have those tools.
That feels like a pretty broad motion.
You want me to narrow it more? I didn't have numbers in front of me, so I don't want to do splits. I don't want to get to that kind of like this many percentage has to go to private.
I think the motion was pretty clear. I mean, to first make it available to public hunters, and then if that doesn't work, move on to other strategies.
Yeah, it's kind of like, let's start there.
There's a motion on the table.
I'll second.
And a second.
And that includes the rest of the antlered stuff, what I would recommend, correct?
Yes, yeah, antlered and antlerless, yes.
So discussion on the motion.
Well, haven't we already passed? Haven't
Oh, do you want?
haven't we already passed the antlered portion, and we're only talking about the
That's
antlerless?
correct. We're only talking about the antlerless. Everything else has been passed as presented.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, and just for me, I just want a clarification. When we say public first, does that mean, like, if that passed, would it be this first year that we can only give tags to the public? Or is that in our discretion of saying?
You're the expert. I'm not a expert biologist. I pretend to be, but I'm not. So I would defer to your expertise and let you come to back to the RACs with those recommendations, with the idea that you'd look at the public hunters first and say, hey, if we give out 60 extra tags, those can get covered with all the public draw hunters.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Any more discussion? All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All those opposed? I didn't see what Josh or Amos said. So Josh is opposed. Amos? Josh, do you want to explain your opposition?
Sure, just in brief, I think the motion is too ambiguous in terms of allowing discretion, that it doesn't provide any sort of mechanism for weighing like what's best effort, what's best interest of the public. And so I still, to say nothing of the CWMU program at large, but only the portion. I think the motion is too ambiguous in terms of allowing discretion, that it doesn't provide any sort of mechanism for weighing
Yes.
what's best effort, what's
Are
best
you in
interest of the
favor of the
public.
motion or against?
Still,
I'm in favor.
to say nothing of the CWMU program at large, but only the portion. I think the motion is too ambiguous in terms of allowing discretion. Amos, can you turn your mic off?
Okay, so that motion passes 7-1.
Hold on, Brock. I think that the piece that I didn't get to say was, I'm still fearful of losing public interest in antlerless harvest, and I don't know that this motion addresses that. So thank you.
Okay, perfect. So that's so noted. It passed 7-1, and I'll make sure that I explain the one in opposition at the Wildlife Board meeting.
Mr. Chair, before you go on, Kellen was not able to make it earlier, but he's been listening to the discussion, and he voted in favor of the motion.
So that passes 8-1.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Okay. Agenda item number 7, the conservation permit rule amendment. Chad's off the hot seat. Now it's Covey.
I've missed you all. I don't get to do this as much as chief anymore. So it's good to be back on a RAC cycle. See so many friendly faces.
Give us a brief synopsis, or do you want us to just ask questions? How do you want to do this, Covey? I think a brief synopsis would be great.
Yeah, I think a brief synopsis would be great. Conservation permit rule, just as a background, and I gave this in my presentation, but the program was started really due to lack of funding for bighorn sheep transplants in the 1980s. Bighorn sheep, once the most prolific and predominant big game animal in the state of Utah, were almost extirpated by about I think 1926 was the last bighorn on the Wasatch. There ended up being a really small remnant population in Southeast Utah. Was the only native population left. And so in the 80s, when we started to restore a lot of wildlife, bighorn were really one of the species that we wanted to work on and try to restore, but we didn't have a funding source. So it was proposed that we would auction a permit to hunt one bighorn ram and then use those proceeds to do transplants, protect, preserve, and propagate, which is what we do. And we did, and it was hugely successful. That program, now today, it's based on the number of public draw permits, right? That you can auction a percentage of the public draw permits up to a cap of 8 per unit. Okay, so if you hit 150 public draw permits, you can have 8 conservation permits for that unit. And then the proceeds, 90% of those funds come back to the division in one manner or another to continue wildlife management, from transplants to captures, our deer survival studies. And it's a great funding mechanism for the agency. The other part of this is, and I think it's probably even more important than the funds, and that is that for a long time, the agency, and we did wildlife management alone, and it started out as probably more of a forced partnership, right? But it turned into real partnerships with a lot of these sportsmen's groups and organizations, to where we're working together and we accomplish a lot more. And so there are conservation groups, 501c3s, that then sell these permits, and they're selling the right to then come and buy the permit from the division. And those are the funds that come back to the division, both the permit price and 90% of whatever the auction price is. Every once in a while, there need to be some changes. This change was primarily spurred by the change in the elk plan. So when we changed the elk plan, if you had 100, we made it so that only 10% of the permits were able to hunt that early September season. And in making that change, then we realized that you could have, if you had 150 permits on a unit, have 15 hunting that early rifle season, and then you could have up to 6 of those permits could be conservation. In addition to that, could be conservation permits hunting that early season. So we pulled that back and toned that down from 6 to 4, while still realizing that the goal of the program is to maximize revenue. So that was the spirit behind this change, and then it led to other things, offering similar opportunities that we do in the public draw to deer, a bunch of cleanup and other things in the rule that were necessary. A lot of it was code cleanup. We removed cougars from being a conservation permit species because there is no permit associated with that hunt anymore. And then just we eliminated variances. There was a variance where you could have a variance on a unit permit, and we'd done that for sheep since the beginning of the program. Every time we present it, we'd come and ask for a variance on the unit permits to go through December 31st. We said, why not just change those in the rule and eliminate variances? And other minor cleanup. Yeah, with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Covey from the RAC? Questions from the public? Turn the time over to Jason for public comment.
All right, for this question, considering the proposed changes for Administrative Rule 6, R65741, we had 6 responses, 3 strongly agreed or 50%, 2 somewhat agreed or 33%, and 1 was neutral, and that's 17%. The weighted average was 4.33, and we had no online comments provided.
Mr. Chair, can I add one more thing that Mike is always reminding me that I feel like I need to acknowledge? And he'll probably acknowledge it too, but I also feel like I need to acknowledge it. Conservation permits, although they are relatively few in comparison to public draw permits, it's still a sacrifice on the public hunter's part. And we should all be grateful for that sacrifice. If we're going to have this program, the public does sacrifice an opportunity to draw those permits to get this funding. And so I guess that's a thanks to the hunters and sportsmen out there that sacrifice a portion of their permits for this.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, but it might, because of it, it might result that our populations are healthier in a greater number, and it's an actual increase in public opportunity as well. So that's, I mean, I think you can count both sides of it.
Sure. They are in addition, right? They're in addition, but they're accounted for. And so there really is never in addition because everything's accounted for in harvest, right? What I mean is we don't present that we have 8 public draw permits and then only have 6 public draw permits. We actually have that number, but we account for conservation permits in a separate process and account for them in the harvest.
Thank you.
I do have a quick question. Do you send out tooth packets to your conservation permit hunters? Because I've had many of those people that never had a tooth packet.
It can be harder to get them to them, and we do try. I'll bring that back, Mike, and just reiterate that, hey, we've got to make an effort to make sure that conservation permits get tooth packets as well.
Because they're probably more apt to shoot trophy class animals that may have the age. So.
Yeah, yes. And I know we get teeth back from conservation permits because I've seen them, but I also know that sometimes it is a challenge. So I'll reiterate that though, Mike.
Other questions? No. Comments? So public comment. We only have one card. You have 5 minutes, Garrett Slatkoff, what is it? Statkoff, I can't
Slatkoff,
read
you're
any of
good.
your writing. Everybody today. D looks like R. I looks like I.
He's a professor, so.
I am a professor. You think I could read bad handwriting, but nope.
My name is Garrett Slockoff here representing Utah Chapter Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We support this initiative or proposal. The minor things we think will help clean up and improve the program, which will ultimately improve the habitat and our wildlife. So we support this. Thanks.
Okay, back to the committee for discussion.
I appreciate you saying that, Kobe, because even though it may, I think it does give more opportunity.
I do too.
It still allows recognition of the partnership, and that's huge. And I like your changes.
And again, the conservation permits are only offered in areas where it's biologically advisable to do so.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the number one reason for the basis of saying, hey, you can't have a conservation permit for mule deer or elk until you have at least 11 public draw permits, and then you can have 1. And so that's the reason why it's all based on that. Yeah.
Are there any more discussion? Then I would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the
Rule amendments?
rule amendment as written.
I'll second.
So we have a motion and a second to accept the rule amendments as presented. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. And opposed? Amos, I didn't see a vote from Amos and nothing from Kellen. Either way, it passed unanimously for those that have voted. Kellen's in favor. Okay, thank you very much, Kobe. You should have traded places with Chad. Would have been better for him and you. Okay, the last thing on our agenda is the Juab County WMA's Habitat Plan. Mark Farmer, Habitat Program Manager. You have a brief synopsis you want to give this group, or just trust, please?
That's on. Okay. So basically, this is a habitat management plan for 7 wildlife management areas. They're in the Juab Valley from Juab County lines down to south of Levan. 6 of these are on the east side of I-15. They're really important winter ranges for mule deer and elk. And one is on the west side, but it does get a lot of mule deer. You said they're a Rocky Ridge. So all these properties are similar. That's why they're together in one plan instead of repeating the same information in 7 different plans. So it just basically describe the properties, describe how we're going to manage them, and have some of the goals and objectives listed there for how that's going to be done. And that's kind of what this plan's all about. And we've got a lot of properties, 42 total in my region, about 110,000 acres. So trying to get through these plans is, by the time we get through them, we're going to rewrite the ones we already did 10 years ago. So anyway, any other questions?
Questions for him, Mark?
Do you feel like you've got enough meat in there to manage like mountain bike trails and those kind of things in these? Because I think my worry is like Temp is now almost a recreational WMA, and that's only going south.
Right. So that's covered in the access management plan, and that use. So what we're trying to do now is we've done with Santaquin WMA is kind of getting to that point. We've identified with the community and the user groups a trail, and that's it. They're going to help manage that trail and maintain that thing, and then there's no other trails. And by doing that trail, we're going to get rid of a bunch of motorized routes that we don't want, that are user-created motorized routes. So I'd rather I'll take that situation, getting rid of ATVs and side-by-sides for some joggers, hikers, and some mountain bikers. So, but yeah, I wish I could build a wall around all my properties and say nobody can come in. That's not reality. So we're doing the best we can. So this one, that's about the only property that has much on it. So it's not nearly as bad as Timpanogos. Timpanogos is just so close to the Wasatch Front. But I think we've done what we can there without a big investment in law enforcement. There's really nothing more we can do. It's still serving its purpose, but it's not ideal.
Thank you very much. You could, some of them have seasonal closures, and I like that. Any other questions from the public? This is a non-action item, so I don't know if there's anything else. Does anybody have anything else to say?
No, just in follow-up to what Mike had mentioned, I've observed a lot of open space, quote, development in Summit County, and the impact on wildlife that aggressive mountain bike trails has created. It's really pushed the wildlife out of vast areas. And I just reinforce what Mike, in a way, what Mike was saying, and ask you to consider that in your plan.
We're aware, yes.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing no other comments, meeting is adjourned.
Hey, I'm gonna make that motion to adjourn. That was the most important, but thanks. Thanks.
Thanks, Braden.